What was the wildest way you found out you were being cheated on? Date night cancelled day of. I decided to make it a guy's night to see the new Marvel movie at the time. As we entered, I saw her sitting at the theater snuggling up with a guy. Our seats were a few rows back, saw them kiss a couple times. When we all left at the end of the movie, they were exiting their aisle as we walked down the stairs. She absolutely froze when she saw me. Blocked her on everything while I'm in the parking lot. I was visiting a dying relative in hospital, so could not attend some stupid college party he and his roommate organized. I told him I couldn't go and asked him if he could come over later, after visiting hours in the hospital, because I knew my relative would die soon and I really just needed someone to be there with me. He said he probably wouldn't be able to, as he needed to help his roommate with party preparations, but would come over later if they finish early. Next day I saw pictures of him with his ex in his lap, kissing, uploaded the previous night by his roommate. The roommate even knew we were dating. He was just too drunk to realize he added me as a friend a week earlier on Facebook and I would see the pictures. Came home off a deployment. Now, ex-wife was acting really weird, but I figured it was because I had been gone for a year and everything was just taking time to get reacquainted. About 3 days after I returned, I had a notice from my unit stating my vehicle had 3 tickets at another base. We were in Germany, a few hours away in the past few months. When I went in to find out what the deal was, all 3 had photos attached to them for speeding through a checkpoint. All 3 had my wife and some other guy. She was kissing him in the 3rd pic. He was driving my car. He told on himself. He randomly called me saying why I messaged his ex, and I was super confused because I never did, and told him it's a misunderstanding, I can reach out to her to explain it's not me. He got super defensive and threatened if I reached out to her we're done. I found it odd and reached out to clear my name, and she spilled saying he's been cheating on me as well as playing her and multiple other girls all at the same time. Turns out one of the girls made a fake account of me and reached out to her. Never found out who it was, but this is the one time I'm glad having a stalker worked in my favor, otherwise I would have never known. Had one of those catching up phone calls with a girl I used to be good friends with. Told her all about my girlfriend during the conversation. The next day, I'm supposed to see my girlfriend and she cancels on me. No big deal. A couple hours later, my old friend starts texting me asking me questions about my girlfriend. She ends up telling me she's pretty sure my girlfriend is in the back seat of a car with her and that my girl's been all over her boyfriend's brother and they're all on their way to the movies now. I try calling her and texting to confront her. She calls me back and breaks up with me. The cherry on top is my girlfriend and I work together, and the guy she's cheating with is my manager. She ends up quitting not long after, but I have to work with this guy for another year before I change jobs. Lol. My colleague had an elaborate wedding, cathedral ceremony, hundreds of guests, to a guy she'd been with for years. She found out shortly afterwards he'd been cheating because they met this girl, who was his colleague and gym buddy, when they were walking in the park, and their 2 French bulldogs, who were noisy and protective, didn't bark at her at all. There was no reason for her to have met the dogs before, as she had never been to their house to her knowledge. So she snooped on his phone while he was asleep, and apparently he had been cheating for over a year and she was pregnant, and they were opening a business together and he was leaving as soon as he had the whole thing set up. When the dust settled, the only thing she was pissed off about was the expense they and her parents had spent on the wedding. He could have called the whole thing off and saved thousands. She didn't learn though. Her second wedding was nearly as elaborate. His sister kept calling me Annie and my name is Andy, short for Andrea. I corrected her a few times, but I didn't care for her at all, so after I ignored her since I thought she was trying to be obnoxious. We only saw her once a week or so. Then I find out after almost a year that he was cheating. Only I was the mistress because he had been with Annie for 3 years and they had a child together. I still don't know if his sister was calling me Annie to laugh behind my back or to make him uncomfortable, probably both. It must have been hilarious to her. Anyway, he used to drive my car all the time, and one day I was out running errands and came out of the store to find a woman with her toddler standing by the car. I asked her if I could help her and she said no, I'm just trying to find out what store my boyfriend is in, this is his car. So yeah, we both learned a lot that day. We hung out all day together comparing stories of times he was unreachable. Then we confronted him together. He walked into her apartment and sat down on the couch with a beer, before noticing I was standing there with her in the kitchen. He said nothing, just put the beer down, got up and left, ignoring both of us as we peppered him with questions. This was about 13 years ago and I haven't spoken to him since. She stayed with him. She was 6 months pregnant the day I met her / found out about her. I had just gotten home for 3 weeks summer holidays. I hadn't been home or seen my wife for a few weeks, so I was excited to get home. It was on the Saturday night and I could sense she was awake into the small hours on her phone. I never thought anything of it as I'd never had a reason to not trust her. At 4:30 a.m. she got up out of bed and said she was going to pick her brother up from a party. COVID lockdown had just ended, so everyone was partying. We have 2 young kids, so we didn't go out. She comes home just over an hour later and jumps into bed wearing sexy underwear, which was the opposite of what she went to bed wearing. Married men will understand. I woke up with the kids at 7 and the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I took the dash cam footage from the car and loaded it onto the computer. There it was, clear as day. Some dude who did not look like her brother at all was thankful she came to pick him up, and they flirted in the car for a bit before dropping him off at his house. It was difficult to watch, but when I confronted her she broke down and confessed. 2 weeks later and the car was sold, 6 weeks after that the house was sold, a year later and we're divorced. It was a tough point of my life, but thank God for that dashcam. Saved me wasting more time of my life with a woman that didn't value me as much as I valued her. I've now moved on with an absolutely fantastic woman and I have my life back, but better. When I was 14 and just got my life uprooted to move to the other end of the state for my dad's new job, I was searching through his briefcase in hopes of finding, and taxing, one of his cigarettes. I was a shit kid. Instead I found a whole pack of developed photos of him and some woman, not my mom, in multiple positions having sex. There was also an A4-sized handwritten song he'd written to the gist of "Fuck everything I have, I want you and nothing else." I was literally shocked. I found my older sister and just shoved it all in her face so she could see what had taken away my ability to verbalize what my problem was. Poor thing, I didn't mean to share the trauma. Long story short, we decided to tell my aunt, my mom's sister, so she could break it to my mother, as neither of us had the heart to directly tell mom, or the spine to confront our dad. Plus I was in the wrong for being a shit human being for rifling through his things to begin with. That event really messed with me for years, issues with trust, men, self-esteem, etc. My parents split and divorced. I now have a sister 21 years younger than me and my dad is still married to that woman. She's a bit of a bitch and not my cup of tea, but I've never mentioned knowing or seeing what I saw to any of them, so to this day only my siblings, not the half-sister, know. Someone very, very close to me realized that something was very wrong when a couple of her rings, including her engagement ring, had disappeared. She asked her then fiancé if he'd seen them and he came across very awkward and non-committal. So she told him she was ringing the police as it must have been a burglary. He pleaded her not to. Then the story came out, drip. Drip. After filthy drip. He'd paid his regular prostitutes with the rings. He'd also siphoned off $20,000 in savings, for a house deposit, and sold off several other assets, as well as getting a secondary loan on his car. Turns out he visited this brothel every week at a price of 1,000 quid. She was the only one with an income at that time. Fucking waste man. Good news is, I got a lovely wife a few years later. Roommate left her laptop open on her desk in our gaming room/office. She blogged a lot back in the day when it seemed like almost everyone had a daily journal/WordPress page. She kept up with it after most people had given up on blogging. Well, according to her and her blog, I was somehow involved in an open relationship with her and my boyfriend at the time. She was writing about her experiences being in an open relationship and how cool it was to have both a boyfriend and a girlfriend at the same time. That was all news to me. For more context, the 3 of us lived together in a 3-bedroom home. I agreed to let her move into our guest bedroom just until she could get back on her feet after a rough breakup, since she was a mutual friend of both me and my boyfriend. So, yeah, I found out I was being cheated on by snooping on my roommate's blog. Adding this edit to answer a few common questions. So, the guy I was with at the time was about 10 years older than me and about 15 years older than the roommate. He liked to drink a lot, and towards the end of our relationship he went from a fun/sad drunk to a mostly angry/sad drunk. When this whole situation with the roommate happened, our relationship was already practically over. He had complained to me numerous times about our lack of love life. But those complaints turned into arguments. Which turned into accusations of cheating, because, and I quote, "If you aren't getting it from me, you have to be getting it from someone else." It apparently had nothing to do with constantly getting into arguments and other issues, according to him. And just not being in the mood was never an acceptable answer. But I digress. I was already mostly ready to leave the relationship, but I was financially dependent on him and didn't want to admit defeat and move back home with my parents. When I found the blog post though, I said enough is enough and decided to move back home. I confronted him and he was more angry just because the roommate was airing our dirty laundry to the whole world. He didn't deny anything that she wrote. There were more blog posts about being happy that I'd be leaving to visit family soon so they could be together again and so on. I tried not to hold anything against the roommate because she believed what he said about it being an open relationship. She apologized for not confirming everything with me, but since I was never mad at her, she just assumed everything was okay? I dunno, it still confuses me to this day. That whole relationship was a crazy roller coaster. Somehow, the two of them are still together today. The relationship had a lot of red flags that I should have noticed a lot sooner. I was young though, and he was my first real long-term boyfriend. I've grown a lot since then, and that relationship has taught me a lot about what I want/don't want out of a relationship. Met a girl through work, not a coworker, got her number, and when we first talked she said she just went through a breakup and didn't want to jump into anything. So I played it cool. After a few weeks we started hanging out and hooking up every day. I really liked her and our connection was great. After 8 months I was like, okay, this is a thing. I was on vacation, we were talking on the phone, and the idea of us still being just friends was naturally brought up by her in a teasing way, like her saying, come on, we're more than that. I told her with a smile on my face that we should talk about that when I get home. Then she went quiet. Hardly answered my text the rest of my trip. Gave no explanation, didn't want to hang out when I got back. I was so confused. I don't have social media, but in my desperate confusion I made a Facebook in 5 minutes and looked her up. She had never broken up with the previous guy. She lived with him. Cheated on both of us for 8 months straight. My ex-wife and I were going through a rough patch. She said she wanted to take a break but still work on our marriage and go to therapy. We had been together for 10 years at this point. We are also both women, by the way. She started spending a lot of time with one of her best friends. He's a gay man that we've both grew up with since we were kids and both close to. They used to date when we were kids, but like I said, he is a fully out and proud gay man. So, I started to suspect something was going on and confronted them both separately. My ex told me I was an idiot for even thinking that, and the guy told me he would never do that to me. He valued our friendship and he was totally gay. Well, one night, he slept over at our house and they went into the room together when they thought I was asleep in the guest room. I wasn't, and could hear them fucking through the shared wall. I was devastated and pissed. I started banging on the door, telling him to come out and face me. He wouldn't and I left after some time, and when I got back to the house, they were gone. My ex stayed with him for a bit, and when she got back, she told me that she was pregnant by him, and she wanted a divorce. I told her that's what I wanted too, and left that day to move back in with my dad. This was 4 years ago, and I've moved on, but it was terrible at the time. Hadn't checked my credit score in a few years. My husband handled the finances and I knew what cards I had and that I paid them off right away, so I wasn't super worried about it. First, I was wrong. I learned that you should always check your credit score. I check it once per week now. Second, I learned that I was the proud owner of an almost maxed out credit card that I had no idea existed and that I had never opened. When I asked my soon-to-be ex-husband about it, we were in the middle of a divorce at the time. He owned up to having opened a credit card in my name, since I had better credit, but he got super squirrely and wouldn't answer or provide access to the account. Said he would cover it and to just let it go. I didn't need to see it if it wasn't my problem. Of course that's not how it works, and clearly something was very off about it. My lawyer was able to get him to provide information on these accounts, by threatening a subpoena, and upon digging through the card history, this was the magical moment that I learned that not only had he opened an account in my name several years earlier, but all of the charges were local hotel and high-end restaurant charges. To this day, he insists that they were all for work. He's not the type to own up to his mistakes, but given that they occurred when he was apparently traveling out of state, that's pretty clearly bullshit. I feel like it's a testament to how burned out and done I was that I wasn't even all that upset, but rather just added it to the pile of reasons why I was elated to be almost done with him. Slightly upset that I was sacrificing my career for his crazy travel schedule and he wasn't actually traveling equals sure. But as for feeling let down, no, not really. I'm not even sure it was in the top 10 of reasons I was glad to be out of there. Also, shout out to my lawyer for making sure I never saw a cent of that debt or any of the other horrible financial choices that I only learned about during our divorce. I walked away with a clean slate, and I know plenty of people who aren't that lucky. I had a long day at work and went to meet my husband at a bar for one drink at closing time. He had recently put a bunch of his paintings on display there. When I arrived at the bar, he was drinking in a booth with 2 women, one young and one old. I walked over, took a big drink of his beer, Introduced myself as his wife and thanked them for coming to his art show. Cue looks of shock and confusion. It turned out he was on a date with his girlfriend and was meeting her mom for the first time. In hindsight I find it hilarious, but I can't get the look the mom gave me out of my head. A perfect mixture of shock and curiosity, with a little bit of disgust. She realized before I did what was going on.